Thank you, Phil. Appreciate you, sir. Yes, we are going to be starting a life group for Lord of the Rings fans. If you're going to come to our life group, this is a joke, by the way. It's not actually a life group. But if we were to make one, you would have to bring your handkerchiefs with you. And there's a password to get in the door. And if you don't know the password because you didn't watch the movies, that's on you. If you watch the movies, you know the password. And we look forward to having you there with us. Well, happy 2026. I hope that the Christmas season was a joy to you. The New Year's was a joy to you. Thank you for starting the year off well. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for loving one another. Thank you for being part of the church family. If you're not yet, my name is John. I'm one of the pastors here, and we want to just say that we are glad that you're here. We're glad that you're watching online, glad that you're here in person. We're so excited to have you here because we love Jesus at this church, and we want to introduce him to you. And if we haven't had the opportunity to do that outside of this building, well, then we are so glad that we get the chance to do that inside of this building, and we want to carry that out because we here at 412 Church want to be these three things. We want to be Jesus-focused. Some churches will mention Jesus. We really try not to just mention Jesus once in a while. This church is here for Jesus Christ. We want to be Jesus-focused people. We want to be biblically rooted Christians because if we really love Jesus, we're going to love the things that he loved. And he loved the Bible. He loved the scriptures. He loved what God had spoken to his people. When he's asked about marriage and divorce and death and resurrection, all these sorts of things in the Gospel of Matthew, what did he say? Have you not read what God said to you? And he pointed right to the first couple pages of this book. Have you not read? God spoke, gave you the answer. Will you not hear it and live your life accordingly? We want to be that as we follow Jesus. We want to be biblically rooted. But the reality is, if we really love Jesus and we really are biblically equipped to have a biblical worldview, to have Jesus' view of the world, of people, of God, of society, of laws, of good, of bad, justice, all those sorts of things, then we will be culturally equipped, culturally engaged people, because the gospel starts in Jerusalem, Jesus says, and then it goes out to Judea and then to Samaria and to the ends of the earth. That means you go out and you engage life. The Christian life does not happen just in these walls. Much more of the Christian life happens outside of this building. And we must not be Christians who just come in, sit, listen, walk out, and as though it only happens here. It must not. And we're going to see that again in our study today. We're going to the Gospel of Luke, and we got new people here all the time. We just want to make sure we have these foundational understandings of things together. If you got a Bible in your hand, if you don't have a Bible of your own, there's one in the chair in front of you, probably underneath you. We got red ones, we got black ones. Take that with you. That is yours now. Take it with you and read it. Because Jesus said, have you not read what God said to you? Not what did you feel, not what did you hear. He said, have you not read what God said to you? Well, in this collection of books, and that's what the Bible is, it's a collection of 66 books written over about 1,500 years of human history in different languages, in different empires, different nations at times. 4 of those 66 are called Gospels. They're simply refers to books that tell us specifically about the life experience of Jesus Christ. You got Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're very similar books. They're called synoptic gospels. They tell a lot of the same stories of what happened in Jesus' life. And then you have the 4th gospel, the Gospel of John, which talks about some events, but it's really much more focused on the kind of personal conversations that Jesus has that didn't really make it into the newspapers. Kind of the stuff that happened behind the scenes. It's a peek behind the curtain of the ministry and the life of Jesus. And so as we look at these 4 Gospels, we recognize they're each written for a different audience and for a different purpose. John was written, he tells us at the end of the book, so you would understand something, you would believe something, and you would live having believed that. Luke is another great one that tells us why he wrote it. And please, as we're going through this study, never ever forget the beginning of this book. It is so important. It has so much significance as we're doing this, because people will say, well, does this book really have any relevance? This thing's 2,000 plus years old. It's written by people who had no education. They were stupid. They were ignorant. Can it really have any significance to my life? Well, I understand why people ask that question, but that question shows me that the person asking it knows very little about what the Bible actually is. For example, the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. Luke is a doctor. He was the highest grammatical linguistics of the ancient world, of the first century at least, come from Dr. Luke in the book of Luke and Acts. It's extremely high-level Greek language. Let's say this. He had a PhD, and you can tell by how he wrote. He uses big words and big sentence structure. He's not like John. John's a fisherman who talks in little words like me. Red car, red fish, blue fish. It's like 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, Gospel of John. It's very relatable. The Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts are very detailed, very historic, very, very serious stuff. Well, it starts like this. This is how the Gospel of Luke and the sequel, the book of Acts, start like this as well, very similar. They're written to the same person, by the same person. We can tell by the writing. It starts like this. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us, these things that have been taught. Notice it says they're eyewitnesses. The author here is not claiming, hey, I heard this story about a galaxy far, far away. Once upon a time, there was a pretty princess riding a pony. There were eyewitnesses of these things, and though I wasn't there, I have had access to, and they have delivered these things that they were eyewitnesses of to me. In fact, he says to us. It's not a hidden thing. It's a corporate thing. They were telling people, just as we will read in Luke's second book, the book of Acts. The gospel goes out, and it impacts other people. And right in the middle of the book of Acts, all of a sudden the author starts saying, we. So you get a few decades down the road in the story, all of a sudden the author who's been delivered something now says, I've experienced something. I've seen these things. Not all of them. You get that from other people. But it's eyewitness. They've delivered something to us. And so it seemed good to me also, having followed all these things closely for some time, and it seemed good to me to write an orderly account to you, most excellent Theophilus, so that, what does that opening sentence tell us? That the Gospel of Luke was written by someone who was really well educated, to someone who was really important, for a specific reason, and it had evidence behind it. You may not believe that evidence. You may not believe the eyewitnesses, but it wasn't a blind faith that Luke just made up. He says, I got this from people who were there. I participated in some of this. I followed this for a long time. I've collected the testimony of those that were there, and I put it in an orderly account so you would have, notice there at the end, so you would have certainty about the things you have been taught. Now, you don't have to believe Luke when he says that, but that's at least what he said about himself. And if we're not willing to hear what someone says about themselves, then we really have no business criticizing them. It's just ignorance and arrogance at that point. At least hear what he says, what he's claiming. Here's the claim. I want you to have certainty about the things you've been taught. Taught about what? About Jesus. What actually happened. We have no idea who Theophilus was. I personally think he was someone of significance in Rome. Someone that had influence over the Apostle Paul's trial later in his life, because the book of Acts ends with him in jail in Rome at that point. It doesn't record his death. I think Theophilus was somehow involved in the trial of Paul. Whether I'm right or not, we'll argue about that in the life group as we talk about the ring and everything. Oh, okay, you're tracking with me. All right. Well, in the Gospel of Luke, being written for this purpose, we come to chapter 19. So if you got your Bible there, flip over to Luke chapter 19. And we're starting at verse 11, but please don't forget where we have come, because this parable that we're about to see together is the end of a long journey. Since the end of chapter 9 to the end of chapter 19, 10 chapters is one giant journey. It's one long walk through the woods with the fellowship, all the way from Bag End to Mordor and back. This is that part of the story. Jesus was up in Galilee through the first third of the book, through chapter 9. Much of his miracles happen up there. Much of his ministry happens up there. But starting at the end of chapter 9, it says that he turned his face to Jerusalem. Well, he'd done that before. It was nothing special about going for Jews in the first century to go to Jerusalem. It's about 120 miles, depending on where you're at in Galilee, to get to Jerusalem. It's a long way, but Jews went to Jerusalem all the time. It was the center of religiosity. It was the center of worship. It was where the temple was. It's where the sacrifices would be made. We see Jesus go to Jerusalem multiple times in the four Gospels. It was no big deal, except this time, he's telling his friends what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen in Jerusalem this time. When he went to Jerusalem in John chapter 5, there were some people that wanted to kill him. When he went in John chapter 7, they wanted to kill him. When he was there in John chapter 10, they wanted to kill him. This time, they would do it. And he knows it. Why do I say that? Because in chapter 18, verse 31, Jesus says this. So Luke records Jesus saying this. And taking the 12 disciples, he said to them, chapter 18, verse 31, "Look, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished." Son of Man. Someone shout back. Thank you. Someone over here. Daniel 7. What was written about the Son of Man? Well, Daniel 7 is the place you start, and you work out from there. God had promised about 600 years earlier to the prophet Daniel that someone like a Son of Man would come, and boy, would it be significant. Jesus will talk about that many more times through the Gospel of Luke. What was written will be accomplished. Well, what will be accomplished? Notice what he says here. Look at all the verbiage. Verse 32, "For he will be delivered over to the Gentiles. He will be mocked. He'll be shamefully treated. He'll be spit upon. He'll be flogged. He will be killed. And on the third day, he will rise from the dead." There are 7 verbs there. Jesus tells them exactly in order what's going to happen. But as we've seen since chapter 9, they weren't listening. They wanted nothing to do with Jesus' plans in Jerusalem. That's why Peter rebukes Jesus. "Jesus, stop telling people this is going to happen." And Jesus says, "Peter, be quiet. Get behind me, Satan, for you are a hindrance to me. Your mind is set on the things of men, not the things of God." That was in chapter 9. Now we're in chapter 19. He's just told them this, and we're about to see they still don't get it here in chapter 19. Since chapter 9, Jesus has been on this journey. Since chapter 11, you've had this running battle with the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees in particular. There's this other group called the Sadducees. There's this other group called the Scribes. These different religious, social, civil leaders, all of whom seem to be gunning for Jesus because he's drawing attention away from them and to himself. Oh, they loved the accolades. They loved getting in with the hype. They loved the miracles even, except when Jesus started saying, "Okay, now you've got to follow me." All of a sudden, the attitude changed. And now, who was a good teacher and a miraculous physician now becomes a demon. Now they hate him. Now they're grumbling at every time he does something. Every time something good happens, like we saw at the beginning of chapter 15, sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, thieves are stopping their evil life as these guys were telling them to. But the problem was, in stopping that evil life, they were going to Jesus, not to them. And so we see in chapter 15, no matter how many people repented, changed their life, turned it around, this group could only diagangazan. Gungasmoo in singular. Diagangazan means all of us are together complaining and whining and bickering. And it was a mess of complaining, whining people. And so Jesus tells those 3 parables. Well, that same group is around here in chapter 19. We saw that last week. We're going to see it again here as Jesus approaches the last stop on his way to Jerusalem, this little town called Jericho. We also see a pattern here in Luke's presentation in chapter 17, 18, and 19. There's these parallel personalities, these stories with these contrasts. They keep popping up. For example, back in earlier, was Jesus was saying, he gives this parable of a Pharisee and a tax collector, a religious person and a thief, basically, in the temple, praying. And while the Pharisee, the religious leader, is standing up and waving his hands and showing off all that he has done, he's saying, "God, look at all that I have done for you." The tax collector's over in the corner, and it says that he is broken and he will not even look up to heaven. He beats his chest and says, "God, forgive me, I am a sinner." He didn't make any excuses, didn't blame anyone. He just confessed, "I'm a sinner and I need mercy." And Jesus says that sinner, that tax collector, that thief went home justified. Remember, he told that story, Luke tells us, because he saw people who thought that what they were doing would justify them. And so he tells that story, this contrast. You then have the second contrast of the kids coming to Jesus, the families bringing their children to Jesus, and they're being pushed away by the disciples, versus the rich young ruler who's coming in, and the disciples seem to be embracing this. Like, "Oh, hey, here's someone with a lot of money, a lot of opportunities, someone who could back us up, someone who could have some influence in Jerusalem maybe." Problem is, the kids and the families wanted to come for Jesus. This guy wanted to come for affirmation. Just like the previous Pharisee, this guy shows up and says, "Jesus, I've done all these things. What else do I have to do for God?" That's my next $1 million right there. What else does God expect of me? And Jesus says, you need to get rid of your idol. You think God's impressed by all this? Give it away and follow me. And it says that man turned and left, and Jesus let him go. Then you had two individuals in the city of Jericho itself. A blind man, we're told in another gospel, his name was Bartimaeus, and a guy named Zacchaeus. Very different people. One is blind, one can see. One is rich, one is poor. One is affluent, one is destitute. One can see everything, but he's blind. While one can see nothing, even though he can see just fine. Bartimaeus is blind. He's been blind. We don't know how long. He's laying there on the side of the road as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and he hears people saying, hey, here comes Jesus from Nazareth. I love Bartimaeus. He's one of my most favorite people in all of the Bible because he's been laying there on the streets of Jericho for years. He's seen nothing. He's seen none of the evidence, none of the miracles that people talk about. All that he has is the word of others who saw it. There were eyewitnesses who told him something. We don't know what, we don't know who, but he heard something. So as Jesus comes into into Jericho, this guy jumps up and he's screaming, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Why did he do that? What prompts someone to get up in a big crowd of people and start screaming like that? He had heard something and he believed it. And when people said, be quiet, he says, no. And he shouts even louder until Jesus says, bring him over here. What do you want? He says, give me my sight back. And Jesus says, all right, your faith has made you well. Notice there was no exchange. There was no, your faith has made you well. Faith in what? In himself? Obviously not. It was in Jesus. Then you have the second guy, Zacchaeus, a rich chief tax collector, a big-time scoundrel, a money-making machine, a traitor to his nation, who, though he can see, he's being blocked by everyone around him. Yet he fought for a way to see. And when Jesus says, I'm going to your house today, I'm going to hang out with you today, people are shocked at it. And notice there in chapter 19, as Jesus goes to his house, it says in verse 6 that Zacchaeus is up in this tree. He hurries down and comes down and received Jesus joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. Who's the they? Well, just earlier in the paragraph, it's this crowd of people that is coming into Jericho. The crowd that was there when Bartimaeus is screaming not that long ago. They included, I believe, the disciples. And the Pharisees. This crowd that's been following Jesus for about 100 miles. And once again, we see that word, diagongazon. They all together were grumbling at him because he's hanging out with sinners like this short chief tax collector, this well-to-do hobbit. I'm going to keep plugging these all day long. It's going to be great. They were grumbling. But then Jesus says in verse 9, after Zacchaeus has this massive transformation, everyone's grumbling. Everyone is the obstacle except Jesus. And yet Zacchaeus, like Bartimaeus, overcomes that. And he has this transformation in his heart as he looks at his life and all the things he had done. He says, if I've defrauded anyone, I'll return it. If I've stolen from anyone, I will pay them back 4 times as much. There's this massive transformation in his life. And then Jesus says this. This is important because it's the introduction to our story today. Verse 9, Luke 19, verse 9, and Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, thank you, Daniel 7, came to seek and to save the lost. What did Jesus mean? Today salvation has come to this house because he also is a son of Abraham. Zacchaeus was a Jew. He'd been a son of Abraham his entire life. What changed now? They can't hear you in the back. Say it louder. Come on. Thank you. Okay. What was the difference? He was a son of Abraham. He was a Jew. He was a Hebrew. He was a descendant of Abraham. Yes. But Jesus has this conversation multiple times in his life, and the Apostle Paul will explain this, especially in the book of Romans, chapter 2 through chapter 5, as he gives the gospel. It starts out in his conversation to the Jewish audience there in Rome, and he says, what advantage does the Jew have? Great advantage, because they had the oracles of God, they had the scriptures, they had the covenants, they had the promises. But being a Jew is a matter of the heart, not a matter of the flesh. He said, explains, the Apostle Paul, a Jew, explains to the Jews in Romans chapter 4, Abraham is the father of many nations, not just one. He's the father of all who have faith. Why was, this is the argument Paul makes, why was Abraham declared righteous before God before the law? Why was he declared righteous in Genesis 15 before he was circumcised in Genesis 17? Paul explains that, so that he could be called the father of all who have faith. He'll tell the Christians in the book of Galatians that Abraham is the father of all who have faith. It's a theme that keeps coming up. This man was a physical descendant of Abraham, but he was not a son of promise with Abraham because he had not believed what Abraham believed. God had said something to Abraham and he believed it. God had said something to him and he had rejected it until this moment. Now there's a physical evidence of a change in, I believe something different now, so I'm going to act it out. I'm going to live it out. And Jesus says salvation has come. Something has changed in this man. This is what leads to the next part of the story. This is so important because Jesus is there in the city of Jericho. He's come about 100 miles from Galilee. He's got about 20 to 30 miles, depending on where he is exactly, from Jericho to Jerusalem. This is the final stage of this journey. It's the final climb up Mount Doom as he heads toward Jerusalem, toward his doom. It's a change in elevation of 3,500 feet. Jericho sits about 700 feet below sea level. Jerusalem's 2,500 feet above sea level. So there's 3,500 feet of elevation climbing. That's why Jesus said back in chapter 18, verse 31, look, we are going up to Jerusalem. You always went up to Jerusalem. The main highway is 700 feet below sea level, and you got to climb this mountain to get up there. There's the road today. As you drive from Jericho to Jerusalem, some of you have been on that road, as I have. You have to drive up this hill, and then you go through a tunnel, and you come into Jerusalem. It's a real place. It really happened. That's why you have the Psalms of Ascent. The last few Psalms in the book of Psalms are called the Psalms of Ascent because the Jews would ascend, they would climb the mountain going up to Jerusalem, and they would sing these several songs over and over and over again as they went up this hill right here where this road is. Well, this is the setting for verse 11. They're there at Zacchaeus' house, having lunch with Zacchaeus. They, corporately, are grumbling together. And then you have verse 11. And please, this is another one of those places where Jesus is going to tell a parable. If you miss the setup for the parable, you will misunderstand, you will misuse, you will even abuse this parable. And it has happened over and over and over through history to violent, evil ends because people forgot verse 11. It says this, as they heard these things, what things? Well, the sentence before would be a great place to start. Salvation has come to this man's house because he is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. Having heard these things, he, Jesus, then proceeded to tell them a parable. Please circle that, underline that. What Jesus is about to give here is a parable, not a game plan, not a playbook for every day of the Christian life. That's found elsewhere. This is a parable. It is an illustration. It is something to get your attention, to get you thinking about certain principles, certain applications. Do not take a parable and implant it into an area of life it does not belong. Again, this has happened, and we're going to talk about that down the road here. When we refuse to read why the parable was said, where it was said, to whom it was said, we will abuse it. And this is certainly one of them. Notice the two reasons. Not only is there a setting, we're told what this is. It's a parable, not a teaching. It's not an essay. It's not a dissertation. It's a parable. Because his audience is missing something. They're missing two things. Number one, because he was near to Jerusalem. He's about 20 to 30 miles from Jerusalem, going to where he just told them in chapter 18, I'm going to die. I'm going to be flogged. I'm going to be spit on. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to rise from the dead. And because they supposed something about eschatology that was wrong. They supposed that the kingdom of God would be appearing immediately. Since chapter 9, we've been tracking this. Peter, John, the disciples, the crowd are all hyped up because this miracle worker has shown up and thousands of people are being drawn to this random carpenter's kid from up north. And he keeps talking about the Son of Man, and he keeps calling himself the Lord of the Sabbath and all kinds of stuff. This sounds a lot like the prophecies of the Old Testament about this kingdom that God's been promising it's supposed to come. And so there's all this excitement around him. But what he actually told them in chapter 18, they keep missing. There's a tradition, there's a presumption, there's an energy, an excitement, a hype that has blinded them to all these things. And that is why Jesus tells this parable. If you cannot tell me verse 11, do not tell me the rest of the parable. It gives you the reason for it. Do not misuse the parable because you forgot to read verse 11. There are two reasons. Because he was near, and because they supposed something incorrectly. That's why he tells them this story. And what he's going to ask his audience here in this parable is this question that you and I need to be thinking about. How is your portfolio this time of year? The beginning of the year is a great time to be thinking about your finances because taxes are due in a few months here. It's not my favorite part of the year, but it does force me to rethink an important area of my life, especially as it comes to finances. And I get to think about, what have I really accomplished? What have I really invested? How has it performed? If we never check those things, we will never succeed. And here, Jesus is going to use finances to talk about spiritual things, especially as it comes to the Christian faith. As I was working through these things this week, I found an article from Gallup News from May of last year that said this: only 62% of Americans invest in the stock market at all. That means 4 out of 10 Americans do not participate in the greatest wealth-building mechanism, the easiest wealth-building mechanism in human history. 4 out of 10 Americans don't even participate in the least. They didn't say this, but I think I can confidently assume that the majority of the 62% that do participate passively. We go to work, we have a retirement package, they take money out of my check, they put it in some investment somewhere, some mutual fund somewhere, I don't know what it is, where it is, I just get a number in the mail at the end of the year, and I hope it goes up. The vast majority of Christians do exactly the same thing with their faith. I'll show up and I'll sing and I'll kind of drop some coins once in a while, I guess. I love that. As we go to a cashless and digital society, people will forget that sound, and it's a bummer. That's a cool sound. I just like the jingle of coins. Something we're losing in human history. Most Christians will never hear that in their faith either. It's so easy to just show up and then walk away, to show up and say something but never follow through. And that's exactly the attitude Jesus is going to confront in his disciples here. Let me ask you a question. How do you turn $61,000 into $1.6 million? There's all kinds of ways you could do it. You could steal from someone, I guess, steal a Tesla. You could defraud someone like a tax collector. Not saying if there's any tax collectors here, I'm not saying you, I'm just saying them, like Zacchaeus, those kind of people. You know the simplest way to turn $61,000 into $1.6 million? Invest in the American stock market. The average market rate of return in the United States for the past 120 years is 10%. Grandma and Grandpa, if you gave your grandkids at the age of 15 $1,000 and they invested $100 a month for the rest of their life, they would have invested $61,000, and over 50 years that would grow to almost $1.6 million. That's not active investing. That's incredibly passive. Buying the S&P 500 for 50 years, 61,000 becomes 1.6 million. And yet, so many people will never do it. You know what? Frankly, so many Christians will never do it. We'll just show up, open this on Sunday, and as soon as the pastor says amen, we're done. And it never grows. I was convicted years ago. I had a mentor who asked me one time, "How's your Jesus portfolio?" And I had no idea what he meant by that. I didn't even know what portfolio meant. At that point, I had zero understanding of these things. He explained to me that earlier in his life, he'd been saved in his teens, come to Jesus in his teenage years, and he had made a decision at some point early in his life that he wanted to accomplish certain things, and he was going to be working toward them. He made a game plan of what he wanted to give back to Jesus through his life, and this is what he came up with. In his life, whatever time that he was given, whatever opportunities that God might give him, his goal was to accomplish these 5 things. Plant 100 churches, tithe $1 million, share the gospel with 1 million people, train 1,000 pastors, and start 1 Bible college. That was his goal. About, 20 years ago now. He's accomplished all of these things, and he's not done yet. That's astronomical to me. When he told me that, I thought he was crazy. Who can accomplish that? People that plan to might accomplish those things. People that never plan will never accomplish any of these things. People come to me all the time, would you pray for my neighbor? Would you pray for my parents? Would you pray for my grandkids? Absolutely. But what are you doing? Have you ever shared the gospel with your neighbor? Do they even know you're a Christian? What do you want to accomplish, and what have you accomplished? Once in a while, you and I have to think about those things, because there will be a day when that is brought to account, when Jesus shows up and says to his servants, to his people, what did you do with the gifts I gave you? That's what leads to this story. Look at this parable. It's an extended parable, but it's a very simple one. Look there in verse 12. Jesus then said, because of those 2 reasons, he's going to Jerusalem, and they are supposing the kingdom of God's coming immediately. It's not. He says this, gives them this story. A nobleman went off to a far country to receive for himself a kingdom, and then to return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them each 10 minas, and said to them, engage in business until I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. But when he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered his servants, to whom he had given the money, to be called to him, so that he might know what they had gained by doing business. We'll stop right there for a second. Notice the first thing he says. Jesus in this parable, because he's going to Jerusalem to die and to resurrect, and because they suppose the kingdom is coming immediately, and it's not, he tells them a story of a nobleman who goes away to become a king. He's gone for a while, and while he's gone, he calls his servants together to engage in business until I return. Why did he say that? What's that connected to? It's obviously connected to what Jesus knows is about to happen in his life. And what's funny is this actually happened in history. We're just celebrating Christmas, and we know part of the Christmas story is this guy named Herod, King Herod. He's the bad guy who tries to murder Jesus as a baby. When he dies, as the Gospel of Matthew records, his son Archelaus becomes the next ruler. Notice I didn't say king. Because in this time, Israel is under the dominion of the Roman Empire, and you had to get permission from Caesar to be called king. Herod had that permission. When he died, his son did not get it. So Archelaus, in history, went to Rome to ask Caesar to give him the title king. The Jews and Samaritans, the people in the area that he would be king over, sent a delegation to Rome to ask Caesar not to make him king. Do not give him that honor. We don't like him. The guy was a complete monster, like his dad was. They said, we don't want him to be king. So this actually happened in history. It's probably kind of the background of the story here. This nobleman, this high individual, goes off to be named king. A delegation is sent after him saying, we don't want him to be king. When he returns, now Jesus focuses on himself here. He asks for those servants that he gave that money to come back. Engage in business. Well, engage in what kind of business? Well, here, the illustration, the parable is about money. What has Jesus given you and me? Well, he's given us time. He's given us people, your children, your spouse, your neighbors, your coworkers. He's given you a certain amount of biblical education. What have you done with it? Or do you just hold it in? God's given you finances. How have you used them? Have you used them only for yourself, or have you used them for him at all? God's given you all sorts of things. And Paul, near the end of his life, the Apostle Paul writes to his protege Timothy, who's a pastor in a town called Ephesus at this point. And one of his warnings to Timothy is this: to guard the good deposit entrusted to you. The sentence right before this talks about the teachings. Who is Jesus? Who is God? Who are we? What is the gospel? What did Jesus accomplish? What does Jesus expect of us? How does he expect us to live? God has given you those things. Don't tell him that he hasn't given you enough if you won't read it. Don't tell him, God, you never show up. I never hear from you when you won't read what Jesus said God said to you. He's given you plenty if you will but read the instruction manual. Not only that, he's given you a ministry. Paul says to the Corinthians, we are ambassadors of the ministry of reconciliation. God has given us a mission. Have you even left the hotel yet? We're supposed to be out there doing something, saying something, proclaiming something, acting something. How are you doing? The instruction to the servants was engage in business. Then you have another group of characters in this story, in this parable. You have the citizens who hate their king, who hate their nobleman, who don't want him to be king. And so they send a delegation telling whoever's in charge there, we don't want him to be king. Their belief, their desire, their attitude, their spirit had action. We don't want him to be king. That's funny. For 100 miles, people have been following Jesus saying exactly the same thing. We'll take all your stuff, we'll take your kingdom, we'll take your miracles, but we don't want you. We'll get back to them in a second. Then you have the 10 servants. Each of them is given 1 mina. A mina would be basically 3 months' wages for the average person. Just kind of calculating it out based upon the average income here in the United States, it's about $21,000. Each of them gets $21,000, and the king says, engage in business, and when I get back, we'll see how you did. The first man comes back and does an amazing job. Look at what happens here. When he returned, notice that verse 15. When he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered his servants to be called back to him, those that he had given money to. Verse 16, and the first came before him and said, Lord, your mina has made 10 more. Notice he said, your mina, not mine. In the previous stories, all of the people with the money treated it like it was theirs. God, look at all the things that I've done with my money. Look at all the things that I've donated to you. Look at all of my stuff. These good servants, both of them, we'll see here, say the same thing. It's not mine, it's yours. And yeah, they were engaged in business. They took action. They were responsible and accountable for it, but it's yours, not mine. Your mina has made 10 more. The dude made 10 times what he was given. So he was given $21,000 roughly. He comes back with $210,000. And of course, his master has compliments. Look at what Jesus says there. The master then said to him, well done, good servant. Because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have a really big mansion. No. A great retirement. Go play golf, kick by the pool. No. You notice because you have been faithful with a little, with $21,000, I'm going to give you authority over 10 cities. I gave you $21,000, and because of how faithful you were in handling that, I'm going to give you New York and Philadelphia and Boston and Providence and Norfolk and Miami and Baton Rouge. You're going to be responsible for all those things. And you know what? Frankly, someone that makes 10 times what they're entrusted with deserves it. And the master certainly thought this guy did. What about you? How much has he given you? How many years? How much money? How many opportunities? How many people? This man did 10 times. And so he's given authority over 10 cities. The second man likewise comes in, it says there in verse 18, the second came and said, Lord, your mina, not my mina, your mina has made 5 more. Then the master said to him, you are to be over 5 cities. Notice the reward here. Because they have a misunderstanding of the kingdom, Jesus tells them this parable about a king who comes back with a kingdom, not just an area of influence anymore. He's a king. He's in charge of a nation, an empire. And he now has the authority to divvy out the authority over that empire. I gave you $21,000. You came back with $105,000. Well done. You get 5 cities. You get Denver. You get Salt Lake City. You get Cheyenne. You get Billings. You get whatever. You'll notice something in this parable, which sounds a lot like another one, which is a totally different story. The reward for the good servants is not leisure. Kent Hughes said it this way in commenting on this passage. The eternal reward is not rest, it is responsibility. God gives you a gift for a certain amount of time, and based upon how you use that, there is a reward of more work. More responsibility, more accountability. You know, if you go to the end of your Bible, way over here on the right side, The second to last page, Revelation chapter 20, it says this, that when Jesus, the king, returns and establishes the millennial kingdom, John says, I saw thrones, and those sitting on the thrones were given authority to judge and to rule, and they will reign with Christ for 1,000 years. The Christian life is not one of rest. It is one of responsibility. And likewise, that eternal reward for those that do well is more responsibility. This is one of the saddest things that I observe in our culture is that people do not want responsibility. Our culture is a culture of children that want leisure, they want entertainment, they want fun, they want the rewards, they want the privileges, they want the benefits, but they want none of the responsibility. That's not how God's world works. Take responsibility, be rewarded. Part of the reward is more responsibility. You get married, take responsibility. You want kids? You better be taking responsibility because God will hold you accountable for those things. God gives you finances, take them seriously because God will hold you responsible for them. Then it says there in verse 20, then another came to him and said, Lord, here is your mina, which I have kept laid away in a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you, because you are a severe man. You take what you do not deposit, and you reap what you do not sow. And so the master said to him, I will condemn you with your own words. You knew I was these things. Why did you not at least take that little bit of money and put it in the bank so that when I came back, I could at least collect interest on it? Now, please don't misunderstand the parable here. Jesus is not saying that he's some miser, some thief. He's using the words, the accusations of the poor, the wicked servant against him. If you really thought that of me, why did you do absolutely nothing with it? You could have at least gotten me interest. You could have at least bought a CD at the bank with it. You could have at least done something with it. I don't know how long the king was gone. Again, this is a parable. But I just started punching in some numbers. $21,000 invested in the United States stock market at an average rate of return for 3 years, just 3 years. What does $21,000 turn into? It turns into $28,000. That's no work. You get on your computer, you open the account with Charles Schwab or Fidelity or whoever. It takes 15 minutes, deposit the money in from your bank, buy the S&P 500, and you just sit on it for 3 years. This is what the average rate of return turns it into. Master's point is, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you at least put it in a savings account and get me like 1% interest, something, anything? Notice he calls him a wicked servant. You did nothing the entire time I was gone. You took what I gave you. You lived in my kingdom. You lived in my house. You had the instructions. You had the money, and you did nothing with it. You wicked, evil, lazy, arrogant, ignorant person. That's just 3 years. What would happen over 2,000 years? The king's been gone 2,000 years. $21,000 invested at 10% rate of return for 2,000 years comes out to 1.281119410084499E, whatever E means, plus $87. I broke the calculator. But just think about that. Jesus said this at this point. 65 days later, we read in Acts chapter 1, there's 120 people that follow him. 2,000 years later, how many people? You're on the other side of the planet right now. You are a dividend of the ministry of Jesus and the apostles and the people like Luke, second generation. For 2,000 years, you're part of that giant number right there. Are you the end of that dividend? Does it stop with you? Or will it keep growing? Because the king's not back yet. Jesus then says several harsh things here at the end. Just notice them really quickly. Why then, he says, verse 23, did you not put it in the bank so I could collect interest? Verse 24, then he said to those standing by, take the mina from him and give it to the one who has 10. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 minas already. My kids say the same thing. Every time I read this story, they say the same thing. That's not fair. He's got 10. The other guy's only got 5. Why didn't he give the one to the guy with 5? That way we'd have more fairness, more equity, right? Okay, none of us do that with our own personal finances. If I can give it to an investor who will give me 5 times what I invested, or someone will give me 10, I'm going to give it to the 10 every time. It's very practical financial advice. Give it to the guy who gives you twice as much as the other guy. On top of that, it's his anyway. Don't tell God what's fair with his stuff. I don't let you tell me what's fair with my stuff. I try not to tell you what's fair with your stuff. Don't tell God what's fair with his stuff. He gives it to the one who has 10, and then says this, I tell you, everyone who has more will be given, and everyone who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Now remember, this is a parable trying to illustrate spiritual realities. God has given certain wealth, certain time, certain opportunities to us, and if we will not use it, the reward for those things will be given to someone else. If you will not share the gospel with your neighbor, if you will not train your kids to love Jesus, maybe someone else will, and they will get that reward. And all that you spent your life doing, if you trained your kids to love the NFL more than Jesus, well, then this verse is for you. Paul explains this in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 as he's dealing with division in the church in Corinth. There's people saying, well, I love Apollos, and I love Peter, and I love Paul. And there's contention, there's arguing. I like this pastor, I like this church. He says, get over it. We're supposed to be all about Jesus here. What does Paul matter? What does Peter matter? What does John matter? What does Apollos matter? What matters is what we've actually built. And he uses this building, this financial illustration. If you've built your life and you've acquired gold and silver and precious stones, they will survive the judgment seat of Christ. But if you've built straw, hay, stubble, things that don't matter, things you won't care about in 20 years, things your kids won't care about in 20 years, why would God care about them in 20 years? Then here's the conclusion. If anyone's work is burned up in the judgment seat of Christ, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. I believe that this is the situation here with this parable, this person, this servant, because unlike the the similar story of the talents over in Matthew 25, where the evil servant is cast out, this servant's not cast out. He's just rebuked, and his stuff is taken away and given to someone else. I believe this is illustrating someone who is saved, but suffers loss because he didn't build anything. I want to ask you honestly, what do you Christians want to hear someday? Well done, good and faithful servant? Or, oh boy, that was close. It's worth a chuckle, but it's a serious question. What will Jesus say when you walk in? There are those who think that what they have done will impress God. It will not. Well, there are those that are impressed with what God has done, and that is enough. There are those who show up with tons of stuff thinking they have nothing more to do. There are those that give up everything and ask, what more can I do? Which are we? The point of this parable here, I think, is pretty straightforward. For those 2 reasons. Because he's going to Jerusalem, he's going to die, he knows it. And because they've got their eschatology about the kingdom wrong, they think it's happening now, it's not. He's going away, but he'll be back. The point is very simple for the various characters. Number 1, the master is going to go away for a while, but he'll be back, and he will reign, and whether you like it or not. The only question is, are you prepared? What decisions have you made? The good servants will be rewarded. The poor servants will be rebuked. But then the last thing, there are enemies, and those who refuse to bow to the king do not get to live in his kingdom. If you don't want the king, you don't get the privileges of being a citizen of the king. And the illustration, this parable ends with a very harsh statement from this master. But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me. That doesn't sound like the ooey gooey, comfy, hippie Jesus that we so often picture in our minds, who's all about you and your comforts. He is a king. And one day he will return, and there will be a judgment of his servants. There will also be a judgment of his enemies. And friends, every one of us start out life as an enemy of the king. Zacchaeus was an enemy of the king. Bartimaeus was an enemy of the king. Peter was an enemy of the king. Mary was an enemy of the king. Every single one of us start out there. What changes that? Mercy. Grace. not stuff. Please remember this. This is a parable. It is not instructions for how you are to interact with people in your life. I just want you to hear that, because in history, that one sentence from this parable has been used to justify all sorts of violence against people that would disagree with my flavor of Christianity. It's been used to attack Jews. It's been used to attack Muslims. It's been used to attack other people that would call themselves Christians violently. And I just want to say that because that was an abuse of a parable and an ignoring of the actual instructions given to Christians. For example, Romans chapter 12, verse 18. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That's an actual instruction in the midst of a lot of instructions for how you are to live life. This is a parable illustrating the severity of judgment when the king returns. This is not permission for you to go out there and sock someone in the nose because they don't go to your church. That's not what it is. And to do that would be an abuse, and you will be held accountable for the abuse of the Word of God in doing stuff like that. And many people through history have done that, and there is a resurgence of that attitude today. Well, I don't have to live at peace with them because they're not like me. They don't go to my church. They don't believe what I believe. I don't like them. I don't like people that look like them. And verses like this are used to justify it. This is a parable. What's the instruction? What's the application? These two simple things. Engage with the gospel and invest in it. With your time, with your money, with your family, with the people in your life. You only have so much time. How do you start that? Okay, here's the game plan. Here's the portfolio start. Number one, here at 412 Church, Pastor Skyler is going to be holding a foundations class. If you have not taken that class, if you have not yet begun to volunteer and to serve here at 412 Church and you want to, we ask you to take this class with Pastor Skyler. It's a one-day class just so you get to know us, we get to know you, so you hear the foundational things of what we believe here. So you're not shocked by them when you serve here, when you engage with the family, when you become part of the family. It starts here. Last week I had two people ask me, where do I start? It starts right here. We're going to have a class coming up in February. Pastor Skyler is also going to be teaching the next class in our series at 412 University. We're not a real university. We just call it that. It's a special class curriculum that we use. And we're going to be doing the New Testament survey with Pastor Skyler starting on January 22nd. You can sign up for that. Reach out to Pastor Skyler. Those of you that have missed the hermeneutics class and the Old Testament survey class, just know if you miss this class, you're not going to have the option to start the next one. You got to go back to the first one. We want you to have the first 3 classes under your belt before you go on to the other ones. So please jump into that if you can, or we'll be starting hermeneutics over again in the near future. Past that, there's all sorts of ways to begin investing, to begin growing, to begin using the things that God has given you. Men, we got our Titus study coming up. Ladies, we got our 1 John, 2 John, 3 John study coming up. Sign-ups are in the courtyard there as you head out. They're on your right side. There's all sorts of ways for you to begin investing in the gospel here at 412 Church. And there's probably many ways far beyond this church. Friends, what do you want to hear? Well done, good and faithful servant. Or, hey, nice to see you. It's not a guilt trip, it's an honest question. The real Jesus that Luke knew, that John knew, that Mary knew, expects us to live, expects us to act. How will we do that? As our music team comes, we are going to participate in another thing that Jesus directed his disciples to do and was expected of his disciples in the pages of the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. When it comes to this, though, we want to make sure that we are doing it well. And as we look to the pages of Scripture, there are 3 things that we are told to do when it comes to what we call communion. Others would call the Lord's Supper. These 3 things you remember. The number one direction, the most common repeated thing, imperative, remember me. Remember me. Not remember you, not remember your stuff, not remember what you did, how many times you went to church, how much you've given, how many Bible colleges you opened. That's all wonderful, but you did it for me, right? Not for you. When we come to this, we are commanded to remember what Jesus accomplished, not what we might do for him. We are then told to examine ourselves. Friends, if you're not a Christian, please do not participate in this. This is not for you yet. This is for those that like that tax collector, like Bartimaeus, like Zacchaeus, like Luke, had come to understand and believe something. Please do not be insulted by that. I say that with an endearing heart. I do not want you to be held accountable for misusing this. Christian brothers and sisters, likewise, we're told to examine ourselves to see if there's an issue in our heart. If we are not right with God, if there's sin in our life that's undealt with, there's a conflict in a relationship, if there's private sin, maybe there's even public sin. I'll point to another illustration Jesus gave. Leave your sacrifice at the altar and go and deal with the problem and then come back. It's okay to not take communion. This is nothing magical. It doesn't make you any better. It doesn't save you anymore. It honors Jesus when we do it his way, not our way. And then lastly, we're told in 1 Corinthians 11 that as we do this, we are saying something. We are proclaiming something. This is not just an act for me. This is not a private thing. It is a very public thing. I am saying when I participate in this, I am a Christian, I believe this, and until the Lord comes, I will keep saying this. I am a Christian because of what Jesus has done, not because of what I've done. Think on those things as we sing this song together.